Hello there. My name is Dr. Salim Javed. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Lingyas Lalita Devi Institute of Management and Sciences. As you know that we have been talking about understanding cinema, and in this understanding cinema series we are talking about story formats. We have been talking about, like if you remember that we have talked about Black Snyder Beat Sheet, we have talked about Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, we have talked about Christopher Vogler's The 12 Stages of Hero's Journey, and then we talked about Dan Harmon's Story Circle. And in today's lecture we are going to talk about Dan Wells' 7 plot points. Now, what is the point of understanding all these story formats? Recently, I was reading newspapers, and in which Hansal Mehta was talking about why Indian films are not working, what need to change, and then there was a very famous Iranian director who wants to make his second film in India, and he was talking about that how India is not able to realize its full potential in terms of stories. It's a land of stories where you have been having different kind of stories, but we have not been able to translate our own stories into better films. So that's one of the reasons that we have been talking about different story formats, because it helps you develop an understanding about what it goes into making a good story. Writing a story is a different format, but when you are writing for cinema, then that writing differs. It is more descriptive, analytical, detailed, and much more to be very honest, in a very simple language. Now, if you have been following this series where we have been talking about different story formats, you have come across like different format, that these are the points, there is act 1, act 2, act 3, or there is an opening image, or there is a final image, or there is a call for action, or freedom to live, or there is an ordinary world, and then there is an extraordinary world, and there is a return with exiliare, or the protagonist lives in a comfortable zone, and by the end of the story they have changed completely. Now, what is so unique about this particular topic, which this particular format which is developed by Dan Wells? Well, if you as we will be progressing in this lecture, then you will understand why every format is unique. I mean, I'm not saying that one particular format is the ultimate format or is the most important. Obviously, the foundation is laid by Aristotle, where he talks about act 1, act 2, or act 3, or beginning, middle, or end. Rest of the things like hero's journey or particular this 7-point format that I'm going to talk about, which is developed by Dan Wells. What is so unique about? Yes, I have been talking about different story formats, but to be very honest, I am sure that if you follow this specific lecture carefully, chances are that it will solve many of those topics which we hear a lot, we use them, but we do not use them with clarity. Now, that is what makes Dan Wells' 7-point story structure unique. Like most narratives adhere to a standard format consisting of 7 plot points. Author Dan Wells originally outlined this particular format, but he has outlined this particular format because he admits he got the inspiration or the idea from the Star Trek role-playing game narrative guide. So he has put up a lot of things together, and he has developed this. Now, what you can see on the screen is the Black Snyder Beat Sheet. We have talked at length about it, which is like a very interesting format to gauge your story on a frame. Then we talked about Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, where you have which is divided into 3 parts: the departure of the protagonist, the initiation of the protagonist, and the return of the protagonist. Then we talked about Christopher Vogler's The 12 Stages of Hero's Journey, which is interestingly divided into Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, which is like going from ordinary world to extraordinary world and coming back to the ordinary world. And then in the last video we talked about Dan Harmon's Story Circle, which is about how a protagonist leaves a comfortable zone and ventures into a world unknown, and when he comes back he is completely a changed man. Now let's talk about what Dan Wells has to offer in this 7-point story structure. the order in which you design or place the different elements of the story is the critical difference and the secret of the success of the framework. Now, this is very important. Like all the four, story formats that I have been talking about, they have been going in a very chronological order, that if this stage happens, then this happens. Obviously, as a creative person, you are absolutely free to follow either the linear or the non-linear way, but the structure itself is linear. So that is what makes these four story formats that we have talked about so far in one group, and this particular 7-point story structure in a very different group. And why it is put in a very different group, we shall be finding that very soon. So the thing which is important, the way you place or you design different elements of the story is basically the secret of success in terms of filmmaking. Like, now what does it mean that putting things or elements at different place? I'll give you one example during the lecture where I'll be talking about a very specific film, and I'm sure that most of you have seen that film. Is called Matrix. In that particular film, we will try to understand one very enigmatic item which is called subplot. If you type on Google and say what is a subplot, it will give you answer. You will be satisfied. But if I ask you to apply what you have understood in reality, chances are that most of us will not be able to effectively do it. So understanding a specific thing, if I tell you something, you may understand it or you may not understand it. If you come with me and I make you understand in person, chances are that you will remember some of it. But if I make you do that, then the chances of staying this particular knowledge with you will be higher. So how do we place different elements in the story? When I'll be talking about the subplot, that is where I'll tell you how to place different elements or different elements of a story in the way that you like, as well as the way it works. There are both the things. Like suppose if I give you everything, suppose if you and I are cooking a dish and I give you everything, we do not put everything in one go. There is an order in which we put things one after another. And trust me, the taste is basically which element you put after what. So it is not only applicable to studies or formatting, it is applicable to a lot of things in life. So placing the different elements in a right order is basically the secret of success in cinema writing. According to Dan Wells, the best way to outline a story is to start at one end and go backward and forward through the 7-point. Now, this is something you may say that why did I say to start at one end and then go backward and forward throughout the 7 points, whereas I have never said it in any of my lectures so far. Let's see it why I said it. Now, if you look at what is available on your screen, these are the 7 points that this particular format talks about. Number 1 is hook, the second is plot turn 1, the third is pinch 1, then you have midpoint, obviously the interval as we know it in India, then you have pinch 2, midpoint is not interval, we have interval in India. Pinch 2 is the fourth, pinch 2 is the 5th point, plot turn 2 is the 6th point, and resolution is the last point. And as you can see that hook talks about the setup part, like setup is the beginning of the cinema, where you are placing all the characters, setting and establishing everything in the beginning. Then you have inciting incident, which is technically called plot turn 1. Then you have a moment of pressure in the form of pinch 1. Then you have midpoint, obviously, where the character moves from reaction to action. This is very important. Then you have the 5th point is the pinch 2, where the character suffers a major defeat. Then you have plot turn 2, which is like grasping the victory from the jaws of defeat. And then the last point is the end of your story. Now, what makes this particular format unique is that you don't start from the beginning. You start from the end. This is really surprising in terms of this story format, that technically it has to start with point number 1, hook, but this format does not start with point number 1, hook. If I ask you to directly go and read this format, chances are that you will miss the essence of this particular format, because it does not start from point 1, rather it starts from the last point, which is called the resolution, which is the end of the story. Now, what makes this 7-point story structure unique, as I said, is the non-linearity of the steps that it follows. What I mean by the non-linearity is what it does, that it does not start with the beginning point, the hook, but instead it starts with the last point, called the resolution, and that's really surprising. Now, according to this formula, to start the story, one must know the end of the story. Now, this point is revolutionary in terms of, when I got to know this particular thing for the first time, it blew my mind away, because all the formats that I was reading, it was like, how do you start your story? It says that you start your story by finishing your story, or you start your story by the fact that what you will be writing, or how your story will be culminating. The culmination point is the starting of this story format, and that makes it peculiar, unique, and actually different from all the story formats. So what do you see for your protagonist at the end of the story? Starting at the end gives us a clear goal. That's what it is, the clear goal of aims of all efforts. It is a fantastic way to write stories. Now, when we talk about end, like suppose let's talk few films, like how Interstellar got ended, how Oppenheimer got ended, how do you finish your Bahubali, how do you finish your Three Idiots, but if you know the end from the beginning, now these are like very contradictory statements. Now, if you know the end from the beginning, chances are that your beginning will be very, very calculative, because then you will directly be leading your story, from the point of view that how you have ended your story. Now, creating the narrative conclusion first helps outline the rest of the story, in a very effective manner. The first thing you should do is to pick an ending. Now, this is technically a kind of an instruction. The first thing you should do is technically pick up the ending, which is, simply because, there are two possibilities. Now, what are the two possibilities? Either your story will have a happy ending, or your story will have, tragic. It will be a very sad ending. So happy ending will be like up ending, and tragedy is called the down ending. Now, you can say, Salim sir, we can have a open-ended film, or we can have a close-ended film, whatever it may be. You want to keep your ending ambiguous, fine, but that ambiguity itself has an element of hope or element of tragedy. So it doesn't matter, you have a ending film, you have a close ending film, you have a up ending film, you have a down ending film, but if you know the ending, you can start your film really well, because you have a point to reach. Now you are very clear. Sometimes it happens that a lot of people say that let story flow. There is no problem in letting the story flow, because even that flow will reach somewhere, and what it is asking you to do is that where it will be reaching, have a tentative idea of that, so that it becomes easy for your thought process to unknowingly have a track. So look, all the formats that we have been discussing is basically your choice. Okay, I find something interesting in some format, I find something interesting in some format, but it is good to have the understanding of the format, and please make sure that while picking up different elements from different formats, you are not creating a confusion among which state is coming at which point of time in your story. You can have it in a non-linear fashion. Even like a lot of people say, there is a chaos, and there is a beautiful theory which says there is order in chaos also. It is up to you. How do you see it? You see it as an up ending or down ending. It is absolutely your choice. But if you have end of the story in your mind, you can start your story really well. Now, when the protagonist prevail over evil or meets the love of his life, we say that story has an up ending. The villain is defeated, or the love of life, you are able to get her. So it's a happy ending film, and the majority of stories have happy ending. And a down ending occurs when your protagonist is in a worse position than the story begin. The hero might suffer a ultimate death, lose their fortune, or fall in the fall to their enemies. Stories end tragically are called tragedies. Now, there is no problem in having a happy ending or a tragic ending. It depends on you. It depends on the story. If you have seen a film called Guide, Guide has got Guide is technically a tragedy. The man who had everything in life, ultimately he leaves the world, but he leaves in a very glorious manner. So Guide is a beautiful example of it. Bahubali is a different example of it. Three Idiots, as I say, that the film starts. There is an individual. He is about to board a plane. He boards a plane, and then he receives a call. Then he feels, there is a pain in my chest, so I need to get down. So it lands. He gets down. He runs away from there. Then he calls one of his friends who is also doing yoga, and he says, "Kirancho mil gaya." Now, when you see, if you have not seen Three Idiots, they are normal people, and this is how the way it starts. But by the end of the story, you realize that these three were not normal people; they were extraordinary people. So by end, you realize that they are the extraordinary people, but the beginning gives you a very opposite image of them. Or in the non-linear fashion, when they enter in the college, they are absolutely dunce. So it depends how. But the end of your story. Now, as we start with the end, the resolution, we make sure that the characters have reached their culmination of its beginning. The advantage of a structure is that it helps generate a clear character arc. Now, this is something, from writing point of view, this is a very important point. If you know your end, and because end will have a balance, then you have to give an opposite image in the beginning. So if you have an opposite image in the beginning and you have a clear end at the last, you will see a direct progression from beginning till end. So this particular formats give you a clear chance to see a clear character arc. If your character is wise or victorious, it means the character was fool or defeated in the beginning of the story. It is an equilibrium that balances the story. Now, after resolution and hook, first, this was when we were talking about end, we were talking about resolution, and after that, if you have seen that list, we will be talking about hook, which is the beginning of, or the setup part of the story, which comes in the beginning of the story. Then we will go to midpoint, then we will go to plot points, 2 plot points and 2 pinch points. So non-linear sequence of it would be something like this. Point number 1 talks about resolution, which is the end of the film. Point number 2 is the beginning of the film. Now, usually you have beginning in the beginning, but it is on the second step. So, resolution, hook, midpoint, plot turn 1, plot turn 2, pinch point 1, pinch point 2. So, this is how the order will be. It depends, it is entirely up to you how do you sequence it in terms of your film, but it is from the writing point of view that this is how, it will be more convenient as a writer for you to start in this particular order. Now, because your story's climax will set the tone and pace of the entire film, think of a positive or negative ending, then figure out how to bring your character there. Let's talk about one example, which is from Dark Knight, which was released in 2008. The story, follows in terms what is there in the end. Now, hook, this is point number 2, as we were talking about. The beginning of your story will be written once you have determined the ending. Now, this is something that you have not seen in any of the formats that we have talked till this point. Locating your story's protagonist and antagonist at the outset is essential. If you know how the story is ending and what happens to your character, you will have no trouble making a choice. Now think it in terms of Guide. Okay, beautiful film. If you have not seen, do see this particular film called Guide. Now you know that the character, you have killed the character at the end of the story. Now this is absolutely a depressing situation, a tragedy for the film goers. But if you are able to give them a exciting experience, an experience which is full, which is jolly, which is full, which is energetic, you know, then people will not mind having this point to reach, because they have lived the moment. So by deciding your ending, you have actually set the tone for the entire film. Now that is what makes it unique. Now a character arc is something you should work on. Making a character arc is as simple as having them begin the story in a different place from where they will end up. As a result, if your protagonists enjoy a happy ending, then will experience a dismal introduction. Now this is what I have been talking about. If you become wise at the end, you have to be a fool in the beginning. That is what to take from this lecture. Thank you very much.